Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at an article. It's from the Washington Post. Now, this was published on June 4th, written by Michael Birnbaum. And basically what happened is the scientist that ran the show with Sweden and what they did in regards to the current pandemic, he got shamed by leftists and pressured and had death threats and everything else. So now he's walked things back. Sweden's deaths, and they didn't shut shit down, weren't that far off, per 100,000 compared to the United States. And now because Sweden made them look bad, they think that they can play this because he's repenting to the leftists as, Sweden wasn't the way to go. You got to keep shit locked down type stuff. It's funny how they think that this is going to fly like this because, clearly the guy after death threats and everything else walked shit back. That should tell you something. But no, they're playing it as like, oh, this backs us up. No, it doesn't. Not when he's been threatened. And that's why he's doing this, because that's, for all intents and purposes, why he did. Anyway, scientists behind Sweden's COVID-19 strategy suggested allowed too many deaths. They weren't that far off from the U.S. Which, we're talking deaths that fall in line with the flu. Now that we've seen infection rates and everything else and death rates. Anyway, so let's see what Michael has to say here. For months, the world has watched Sweden's light touch approach to fighting the coronavirus pandemic, wondering whether it was genius or misguided. This week, the architect of the strategy acknowledged that too many people have died and said that, in retrospect, he might have pushed something closer to other countries' restrictions. Yes, because, after a bunch of leftists threatening him and his the lives of his family, he decided to do this. How fucking convenient. Should we encounter the same disease with exactly what we know about it today, I think we would land midway between what Sweden did and what the rest of the world did, Swedish state epidemiologist Anders Tegnell told Swedish radio on Wednesday. So, look, they're trying to play this as a win for their bullshit, but he's saying I wouldn't go as far as every other country did. I might, go a little further towards that, but it'd be somewhere in the middle. Swedish authorities have consistently denied that they were aiming to achieve full population immunity by keeping much of their life humming as usual. They said that if they protected the elderly and other vulnerable groups while allowing others to carry on, the country might be more resilient in the face of a second wave of infections to avoid the economic chaos of a total shutdown. Well, not only that, you also got the mental health of people and the health of your society and everything else to figure into this. But hey, whatever. Deaths in Sweden, though, have been 8 times higher than in Denmark and 19 times higher than in Norway, even though Sweden is only double each neighbor's size. See, they pull these specific examples because if you compare Sweden to other countries that locked the ever-loving shit out of their countries down, they're not that far off, and they didn't do that. So they had to cherry pick Denmark and Norway. The outbreak appears to be continuing to course through Swedish society, even while most other European countries have seemed to have gotten things under control, at least for now. No, they really haven't. There's still infections happening, no differently than in Sweden. They're trying to say that because Sweden still has infections, they don't have it under control. But yet they're saying other European nations have it under control, but they're still having infections. Gotta love the lack of logic going on here. And because Sweden's economy is tightly bound to the rest of Europe, it also has suffered, although not as badly as others. So yeah, basically, people were able to live their lives. You had, 44 per 100,000 or something like that deaths, which really isn't that big if you go into percentages here. But they had a problem with that. The leftists in that, because it's going against their bullshit of, we got to lock everything down and they want the economies to implode and everything else because bring about my socialism, my Marxism. Facing heat from voters, Sweden's center-left government said this week that it would appoint a commission to investigate the country's handling of the pandemic. Confidence in the public's health response is dropping, according to several polls released Thursday. A Novus survey for public television found 45% of people now trust the government's response, down from 63% in April. I wonder why. Could it be because of the left legacy media in Sweden basically pushing bullshit like they have here? I wonder. Trust has been key to Sweden's strategy from the start. Public health officials expressed confidence that their citizens would wash their hands and stay apart from each other, and said there was no need to impose tougher requirements. And for the most part, they haven't, because their deaths are in line with a lot of nations that lock their fucking shit down. But you don't want to talk about that, because then you don't have this narrative. Most restaurants and cafes have remained open, albeit with social distancing rules. Salons, shops, and schools for students under 16 never closed, though upper grades and universities did. The biggest change was a ban on gatherings of more than 50 people and an end to big sport events. But most other guidelines have been voluntary and only gently enforced. Yeah, and their numbers aren't that far off from a lot of other countries that locked their shit down, which is why you had to pull out Norway and Denmark from your fucking ass. Swedish leaders have also gone against the tide by eschewing face masks, saying they could make things worse, even as other previously skeptical governments have mandated their use. There's a risk of a false sense of security that you believe that you can't be infected if you wear a mask. Prime Minister Stefan Löfven told reporters last month. Yes, because the way that they're being enforced in other nations. Okay, like here in the United States, for example. All right, you have people taking them off and on without the proper means to maintain proper cleanliness, we'll say, for lack of a better term. Because hand sanitizing repeatedly, it gets less effective. You have to wash your hands between sanitizings. All right, when you're putting on a mask, you should sanitize, wash your hands, and when taking it off, that's not going on. So now you're increasing your exposure by touching the masks and touching things and putting your hands near your face. And of course, even when you're putting on the mask, you're still going to end up touching your face in some place, most likely. So that's what that's kind of talking about. But see, we can't have that discussed, because heaven forbid. But it is Tegnell who has been the fiercest defender of Sweden's strategy. A gruff, self-confident scientist with a mop of graying hair and an ever-present paper coffee cup in his hand, Tegnell has become an object of fascination both inside Sweden and abroad with his iconoclastic approach to the crisis. He shot down other countries' attempts to close down their societies as needless overreaction. He was so dismissive of Italy's approach that he twice drew a reprimand from the Italian ambassador in Stockholm. Yeah, because the Italian ambassador had to fucking, basically act like a spurg and say, well, you can't talk smack about us. Which I find this funny. They bring up Italy, but they don't bring up the fact of comparison of Italy's numbers to Sweden's, really, in this. When Italy had way more deaths and Sweden kept shit open. But also, they didn't have, Italians going and kissing a Chinese guy. Fresh from fucking Wuhan or wherever the fuck they were from. But they were most likely infected from the looks of things with the kiss the Chinese people shit. They kissed a lot of infected people. He was so dismissive of Italy's approach that he twice drew reprimand. Oh, no. I'm sorry. I just get a kick out of that. He twice drew reprimand. I saw that, and I just got to reiterate. That's fucking hilarious. An Italian ambassador talks shit to a Swede, and that's supposed to mean something. He reported to police that he and his family have received death threats by phone, email, and on social media. Yeah, so basically they're pressuring him to back the fuck off from where he stands because it doesn't go with the left's narrative. His change of tone this week was noticeable. Could it be because of all the death threats? Could it be because leftists are being fucking retarded spurgs? Most likely. Tegnell appeared rattled by Sweden's rising death toll. Asked whether too many people in Sweden had died, he replied, yes, absolutely. There is potential for improvement in what we have done in Sweden, quite clearly, he said in a radio interview, and it would be good to know more exactly what to shut down to prevent the spread of infection better. Well, the thing is your numbers aren't that far off from a lot of other countries that locked shit down. So that makes no sense. Let's lock shit down, even though our numbers are comparable to a lot of other countries that did. Makes a lot of fucking sense, doesn't it? Yeah. Let's destroy our economy and our nation's mental health by locking shit down, even though our numbers aren't that bad compared to other countries. He added that it had been hard to learn what helped and what didn't because most countries shut down everything all at once. Public health officials in Norway and Denmark have come to agree with Sweden's open-door approach to schools, saying it may not have been necessary to close them for children under age 14 because of limited evidence they contribute to the spread of coronavirus. Now, this is what's funny. They bring up in the beginning of the article, they bring up Denmark and Norway. And here's Denmark and Norway saying, well, maybe we should have been a little more like Sweden. Further down in the article, closer towards the end. You gotta love that. Tegnell later elaborated that despite his second thoughts, he believes the country's basic approach remains sound. We basically still think that this is the right strategy for Sweden that we are doing, Tegnell told reporters at a Stockholm news conference where he was dressed in an olive green sweater, in plain brown pants, as though he had just come home from a long hike. Now, this is what's funny is they're trying to basically play it like he's walking shit back, but he's still saying they did the right thing. Is it the Washington shitpost doesn't think people are going to read this far down into the article? This is a bit like having an ocean liner and trying to steer it, but with a lag of about 3 to 4 weeks. The official Swedish death toll rose to 4,562 on Thursday, a total of 45 per 100,000 residents, according to data from Johns Hopkins University. I mean, yeah, they've got a little over 10 more. They got 12 more deaths per 100,000, but that's not really that much if you look at the percentage compared to the United States, as you'll see here. The United States has seen roughly 33 deaths per 100,000 residents. Britain, Italy, Spain, and Belgium are worse off than Sweden, according to the data. So, okay, lock their shit down. All right. Italy, Spain, Belgium, lock their shit down. And Sweden's numbers are better, and they didn't. That's another thing they leave towards the end of the article to point out. But many Swedes say the best comparison is with their immediate neighbors in Scandinavia, which have been relatively spared, even though they have similar population density, political systems, and culture. Well, it's more about the fact that their numbers are lower, and you're trying to say, well, look what they did, and they literally did the same type of shit as the United States did. So what does that tell you? You want to make a comparison to these other Scandinavian nations, and there's a slight problem. The United States did the same exact thing. Okay, Italy did the same exact thing. Belgium did the same exact thing as those countries, and their deaths are far worse. So you can't make that comparison and have it be a legitimate one. At certain points in May, Sweden had the highest death rate in Europe relative to population. Sweden's testing capacity has also lagged far behind that of some other European countries, limiting Sweden's ability to quarantine infected people, conduct contact tracing, and fight off a possible second wave of virus in the fall. But they'll have more people who have been exposed to it and have if not an outright immunity, but will have a resistance to it. Sweden's go-it-alone approach seemed to deliver a particular sting last week when Denmark and Norway eased travel restrictions with other countries but not with Sweden, which under ordinary circumstances is tightly bound to both. Policymakers in Finland have also expressed skepticism about allowing travel to and from Sweden. I love this. So Sweden's numbers aren't that different than a lot of other countries. They're better than a lot of European nations, but they got a problem with people traveling to and from Sweden. Basically, that's like, you will do what we did, and if you don't, fuck you. That's what's going on there. They're trying to dictate to Sweden by saying we won't open up travel between us unless you do what we want you to do, even though your numbers aren't that far off from a lot of other countries. In the meantime, Sweden's economy is set to shrink 7% this year, its worst contraction since World War II. Tegnell said that because the Swedish strategy aims to avoid having to shut down a second time or to face a significant second wave at all, the most meaningful comparison can only be made later in the progress of the pandemic. Yes, and everyone else is trying to say now, well, fuck you, Sweden. Even though your numbers aren't bad and you didn't shut down shit, because you didn't shut down shit, even though you didn't. And that's not why, but it is why we're going to make you pay for it. Because it makes other countries look bad when they've locked their shit down and their numbers are worse. But studies of coronavirus antibodies among the Swedish population have so far proved disappointing. An analysis of 1,104 blood samples taken in late April and early May found that 7.3% of residents tested in Stockholm region had antibodies, a rather limited number given the death toll, scientists said. Well, not necessarily. Because the thing is people are washing their hands and everything else. So that's limiting transmission. That could be a reason why the numbers are where they are, per se, to some extent. Tegnell has said that the week's old samples would not give an up-to-date picture of antibody levels and that 20% plus have probably been exposed in the Stockholm region by now. Well, that could be true too, because, antibody levels might be different. Still, as even the hardest hit countries in Europe reduce their infection numbers and step blinking back into the sun, Sweden appears to remain on a different trajectory. What? Their numbers aren't that different than those fucking nations that you're now trying to say that are wheeling shit back. They're actually far better, so fuck you. You seriously are trying to paint a picture here that makes, that you look at it and you can tell it's complete bullshit. You look at everyone else's curve. It is typical. You go up, you peak, and then you go down on the other side. But in Sweden, you have a plateau at a pretty high level, said Bjorn Olsen, a professor of infectious medicine at Uppsala University and one of Sweden's leading researchers of pandemics, who has been sharply critical of the government's response. So basically, they didn't have their, the curve bullshit. They had numbers go up and they've stayed steady. And the point that the reason why they're staying steady is you have a steady rate of people getting infected. All right. Their numbers haven't gone that far off in the United States and a bunch of other countries. They're really not that far off from them. And they don't like the fact that means that you have people getting exposed. Their death rate isn't ridiculous. And they're actually probably doing something that's going to better them in the long run. I know that many countries looked at Sweden as a good example of an open society. We had a relatively low number of cases. And then it started to skyrocket. We understood absolutely nothing. He said, no, people understood that you needed to have exposure to this, but hey, whatever. Olsen said the Swedish approach had been spurred by a mistaken belief that the virus that causes COVID-19 behaves like the seasonal flu, which is extremely fast-spreading and contagious. Instead, he said, it appears to concentrate in certain spots and wreak deep devastation. No, that was the right assumption because it does spread extremely fast, and it is contagious, extremely contagious as well. About half of Sweden's deaths have occurred in homes for the elderly, which is similar to some other European countries, but has fueled criticism in Sweden that policymakers abandoned the elderly to the virus. After cases in nursing homes began spiking, the government banned visitors. Okay? So the old people that were above, most of them were above the average life expectancy. We're back to the gonna kill grandma shit. They took measures and said, all right, we're going to stop visitors and everything else. We must admit that part of the deals with elderly care in terms of the spread of the infection has not worked. It is obvious. We have too many elderly people who have passed away, Löfven, the prime minister, told the Aftonbladet newspaper Wednesday. In neighboring countries, public health officials say Sweden's situation does indeed look difficult, although they also say that so little is understood about how to fight the virus that it may still be too early to tell who has taken the best approach. It is a very sad situation with the high number of deaths in Sweden, said Camilla Stolberg, the Director General of the Norwegian Institute of Public Health, who has advocated a more conventional lockdown approach. That does make a strong impression. I am grateful that we are not in the same situation. However, we may regard both the Swedish and Norwegian approaches as experiments, and we will know only in a couple of years which strategy worked best. Now, the thing is Sweden's numbers are holding. They don't like that they're holding. They expected this shit to blow up in Sweden. It didn't happen. So now, Sweden bad. And look at this guy walks his shit back. Look. That's what they're doing. And they're playing down the fact that this is after he's been threatened by leftists. And his family has been threatened by these shitbag leftists. How convenient. And he still says that he would still do the same thing. So what does that tell you? Anyway, I've covered this well enough. I'm going to leave things here. If you liked this video, depending on where you are watching it, please give it an upvote or thumbs up. If you want to know when new content of mine hits the internet, don't forget to subscribe to one or more of my social media or video accounts listed here. Also, with YouTube, don't forget to ring that bell. You can find all of my video content on both BitChute and YouTube. This may not be the case with other places I upload to, but I will try to minimize this happening. You are always welcome to interact with me at any of these sites on the list, so feel free to do so. If you have anything you want me to cover in a video when it comes to news or current events, send it right along to me. I will try to do my best to cover it. As always, thank you for watching.